20 families had tried. 20. The number was written in marker on the whiteboard at the back of the Dalton County Animal Rescue in Georgia. And the woman who ran the kennels had stopped erasing it after the 12th because she no longer believed the number would get smaller. Each family had come in good faith. Each family had walked to Kennel 7. Each family had reached toward the large German Shepherd inside, and Sarge had done the same thing every time. Not growled, not lunged, not shown his teeth. He had simply turned his back. He faced the rear wall of the kennel, pressed his muzzle into the corner, and went completely still. Like a soldier standing at attention, in a direction nobody else could see. The families stood there for a moment, confused, then embarrassed, then gone. The kennel door would close. Sarge would not turn around. The woman who ran the kennels had begun leaving the light on in Kennel 7 at night because she did not know what else to do, and because something about a dog standing alone in the dark in a corner felt like more than she could bear to think about. Nobody knew yet what he was waiting for. But someone was on his way who did. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the very end, what Master Sergeant Nathan Cole discovered about this dog, and what happened when a grieving widow walked through that shelter door, is a story that will restore your faith in loyalty itself. We read every single comment, and we want to know how far this travels. Nathan Cole was 43 years old and built the way men are built when the military has had them for 2 decades. Dense, deliberate, economical in his movements, the way things are economical when every motion has been rehearsed under conditions that punished waste. He was 6 feet and 210 pounds, dark-haired with the silver beginning at his temples, and in the 3-day growth he hadn't bothered to address before getting in the truck. And he had a face that people described afterward, when trying to explain the impression it made, as settled. Not calm. Not cold. Settled. The face of someone who has looked at outcomes far worse than the current situation and made his peace with the process of addressing them without losing himself in either direction. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they moved through a room the way a sweep light moves through darkness, not fast, not dramatic, but complete, and missing nothing. There was a ridge of scar tissue along his left brow, from a piece of door frame that had crossed his face at speed during a breach in Ramadi in 2008. And it had healed slightly raised in a way that gave his expression, in certain lights, the quality of someone perpetually and patiently waiting for the world to explain itself. He had served 21 years in the United States Army, first with 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis, and then with 3rd Ranger Battalion at Fort Benning, completing 7 combat deployments, 2 to Iraq, 3 to Afghanistan, 1 to Syria, and 1 classified operation in the Horn of Africa, whose existence he did not confirm to civilians. He carried a Silver Star from Fallujah in 2006, a Bronze Star with Valor from the Korangal Valley in 2010, and a Combat Infantryman Badge that he considered the only decoration that mattered, because it was the one given simply for being there. He had retired from active duty 14 months ago, with the particular combination of relief and displacement that men who have spent their entire adult lives in structured purpose experience when the structure is removed. He had moved to Cartersville, Georgia, bought a 12-acre parcel with a house that needed work, and had been doing the work slowly and with intention, because intention was the thing he had left when everything else had been handed in. He had driven 6 hours to get to Dalton on a Wednesday morning in January because a chaplain from Fort Benning had called him the night before and told him about a dog named Sarge. Sarge had been the military working dog assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion's Bravo Company on the Syria deployment in 2019, the same deployment on which Sergeant First Class James Calloway had been killed. He was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, 91 pounds, with a coat of deep black and rich tan that was heavier through the neck and chest, and that carried the kind of density that suggested the dog had spent serious time outdoors, in serious weather. He had a scar that crossed the top of his muzzle diagonally from his left nostril to the ridge above his right eye. A fragmentation wound from Mosul in 2018, before Syria, before everything, that had healed into a pale, raised line against the dark fur, and that gave his face, when the light caught it directly, the quality of something that had been tested at depth, and it held. He moved, in the kennel runs, with a controlled precision that the shelter staff had never seen in a dog, and that one of the volunteers, a retired schoolteacher from Chatsworth, had described in the shelter's visitor log as the way a soldier walks through a room he doesn't trust. He did not waste motion. He did not react to stimulation that didn't require a response, and he did not accept strangers. He had worked alongside James Calloway for 3 years. Handler and dog, Bravo Company, 3 deployments together. When Calloway's team had been hit by a vehicle born-eyed on a road outside Deir ez-Zor in October of 2019, Sarge had stayed beside him until the medevac arrived and had refused to leave the landing zone until the helicopter was out of sight. That was in the report Nathan had read in the truck on his phone at a rest stop in Calhoun. He had read it twice. He had not said anything, because there was nothing to say, and because the rest stop was loud and cold and James Calloway deserved better than to be mourned at a rest stop, so Nathan had put the phone in his pocket and driven the rest of the way in silence. Dalton, Georgia in January held the particular gray chill of the southern uplands in winter. Not the hard cold of Montana or the Dakotas, but a damp, bone-reaching cold that settled into everything and made the town feel smaller and more temporary than it was. The Dalton County Animal Rescue sat on a side road off Highway 41 in a converted agricultural outbuilding that had been expanded twice with mismatched additions and that smelled, from the parking lot, of pine shavings and wet dog and the chemical undertone of industrial disinfectant. The gravel lot held 6 cars. A hand-painted sign near the entrance read, "Every animal deserves a home." Someone had added, in smaller letters below this, in a different hand, "even the difficult ones." Nathan read that sign and felt something in his chest shift by a fraction of a degree. He went inside. Wade Pruitt ran the Dalton County Animal Rescue with the particular efficiency of a man who had confused process management with purpose. He was 52, heavyset, with close-cropped gray hair and the institutional confidence of someone who had held the same position for long enough that he had stopped distinguishing between his preferences and the organization's policies, because in his mind they had become the same thing. He had been the shelter director for 11 years, during which time he had built a functional operation. Adoption numbers were reasonable. Vet partnerships were in place, volunteer retention was adequate, and had made the specific kind of managerial mistake that adequate operators often make, which was to begin measuring everything in terms of throughput, and to apply those measurements to things that did not respond to them. Animals, people, situations that required patience. Sarge had been at the shelter for 14 months, 14 months of Kennel 7. 14 months of turned backs and families who left confused. The shelter had a policy. Animals who had not been adopted after 12 months moved to a reassessment phase. Sarge was now 2 months past that threshold. The reassessment, in Pruitt's operational vocabulary, had one resolution: euthanasia. He had begun the paperwork 3 weeks ago. He had told the staff it was a resource allocation decision. He had said, with complete confidence in the logic of it, "We can't hold a placement-resistant animal indefinitely. The space is needed." He had said this in front of the volunteer from Chatsworth who had gone home and called the Fort Benning chaplain. The chaplain had called Nathan. Nathan walked to the front desk and gave his name, and asked to speak to the director. The woman at the desk, young, with a lanyard full of keys and an expression that suggested she had been at this job long enough to recognize when something was about to change, looked at him for a moment, then made the call. Pruitt came out from the back office with the settled manner of a man accustomed to managing difficult conversations by controlling their pace. He looked at Nathan with the professional assessment of someone who has made many decisions about what people deserve and considers himself good at the determination. "You're here about the shepherd," Pruitt said. "Sarge," Nathan said. "Right." Pruitt folded his arms across his chest. Not aggressively, but with the particular containment of a man arranging himself for a conversation he has already finished in his head. "The dog's been through 20 adoption reviews. He's placement resistant. I understand the military angle, and I respect it, but I've got 47 animals in this facility and I have responsibilities to all of them. The review period has a conclusion." "When?" Nathan said. "End of the week," Pruitt said. "Friday." Nathan looked at him for a moment. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his posture. "I'd like to see him," he said. Pruitt hesitated for the space of 2 seconds, long enough to make clear that he was considering whether to allow it, then nodded and gestured toward the kennel corridor. The corridor smelled of pine, and something underneath the pine that was older and warmer and animal. The overhead lights were fluorescent and buzzed faintly. Nathan walked to Kennel 7. Sarge was in the corner with his back to the door, the way the woman at the front desk had described, the way the report said. His coat was clean. His posture was correct. He looked, from behind, exactly like a soldier standing at ease, present, contained, turned away from something that had not yet arrived. Nathan crouched in front of the kennel door. "Sarge," he said. The dog went still in a different way, not the stillness of refusal, the stillness of recognition. His ears rotated back toward Nathan's voice without his body moving. One slow rotation, precise as a radar dish, and then held. Nathan put his hand flat against the kennel door. "I knew James," he said. "I was with him. Not at the end, I know, but before." He paused. "He talked about you, more than you'd think a ranger would admit to talking about a dog." Sarge turned around. It was slow. It was deliberate. He brought himself around from the corner the way he did everything, without waste, without theater. And he walked to the kennel door, and he pressed his muzzle against Nathan's hand through the wire, and he stayed there. His eyes were amber and very steady, and they held Nathan's face with the particular attention of an animal that has been waiting for a specific confirmation and has just received it. Nathan did not speak for a moment. His throat had tightened in the way that it tightened in the truck at the rest stop, and he gave it a moment to settle. Because James Calloway still deserved better than a parking lot, and so did this dog. He stood up and went back to the front desk. He called 2 people from the parking lot, standing beside his truck in the January gray, his breath visible in the cold air. The first call went to a colonel at Fort Benning, who had served with Calloway, and who had written the after-action report Nathan had read at the rest stop. The second went to a JAG attorney in Atlanta who specialized in military property and service animal law, and who answered on the second ring because she knew Nathan's number and knew that if Nathan Cole called on a Wednesday morning, it was not a social matter. He was back inside in 11 minutes. What Pruitt did not know, what he had not thought to verify when he began the euthanasia paperwork, was that Sarge, as a retired military working dog, carried a specific legal status under federal statute that governed his disposition, and that this status required notification to his last registered handler's next of kin before any terminal action could be authorized. James Calloway's next of kin was his wife. His wife had never been notified. The paperwork Pruitt had filed was procedurally invalid, and the colonel at Fort Benning, who had been the signing officer on Sarge's retirement documentation, was now on the phone with a JAG attorney, and what that conversation produced would arrive in Pruitt's email inbox within the hour. Pruitt received the email in his office at 11:47. He read it twice. He printed it. He set it on his desk and looked at it for a long time. Then he came back to the front desk and found Nathan Cole standing at the counter, waiting. And the expression on Pruitt's face had changed in the specific way that expressions change when legal language has replaced administrative confidence. "There's a process," Pruitt said, "carefully now." "There is," Nathan said. "It starts with notifying the next of kin, which hasn't happened. So Sarge stays here, in Kennel 7, with the light on, until that notification is made and the widow decides what she wants to do. And if you move forward before that notification is complete and documented, the colonel at Benning will make sure the appropriate people know about it. I won't have to do anything at all." Nathan said this without anger and without emphasis. He said it the way he would brief a mission, factual, complete, giving the other party one clear path forward and letting them choose it themselves. Pruitt said nothing for a moment. Then he went back to his office and closed the door. Sarge had moved to the front of Kennel 7. He was standing at the door of his kennel, watching the corridor, with his ears forward and his weight balanced evenly on all four legs. He was not agitated. He was not distressed. He was simply there, attentive, present. The posture of a dog that has understood that something has changed and is now waiting for whatever comes next. Nathan looked at him through the kennel wire. "Hold on a little longer," he said. The notification call to Claire Calloway was made by the Fort Benning chaplain at 2 o'clock that afternoon, from his office, with a JAG attorney on a separate line. Claire Calloway was 39 years old and lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in the house she and James had bought 4 years before his last deployment. She had 2 daughters, ages 9 and 11, and she had been putting one foot in front of the other for 14 months, with the particular discipline of a woman who has decided that her children need her to be standing when they look for her, and who has honored that decision every morning, regardless of what the morning costs her. She had known about Sarge. James had written about him, had called from Kandahar once in the middle of the night because something had happened and he needed to talk. And he'd said, she remembered, that the dog had stayed beside him the whole night without being told to. Just stayed. And that he didn't entirely know what to do with that, but she had not known what had happened to Sarge after Syria. No one had told her. No one had thought to. She listened to the chaplain. She asked 2 questions. Then she said she would be in Dalton by Thursday morning. And she was. The volunteer from Chatsworth was at the shelter early that Thursday and stood near the front of the kennel corridor when Claire Calloway came through the door. She described it afterward to her daughter, on the phone that evening, in the halting way of someone trying to find language for something that language was not really adequate for. She said that Claire had walked in quietly, a tall woman, composed in the way of someone who has had to learn composure the hard way, wearing James's army jacket, the one with the ranger tab on the shoulder, because it was January and it was cold, and maybe for other reasons, and that Sarge had heard something before she had turned the corner into the kennel corridor, because his head had come up and his ears had rotated in the direction of the front entrance while Claire was still at the check-in desk. By the time Claire reached Kennel 7, Sarge was at the door of the kennel. His tail was moving. It was the first time anyone at the shelter had seen his tail move. Claire stopped in front of Kennel 7 and looked at the large dog on the other side of the wire. And the large dog looked back at her with amber eyes that were steady and warm, and that held her face the way they had held Nathan's, but differently. with the quality of a recognition that ran deeper than acquaintance. The recognition of something that had been carried for a long time and had just been set down. She put her hand against the door. Sarge pressed his muzzle into her palm. She stood there for a long time without speaking. Then she said, very quietly, "He told me about you." Sarge's tail moved again, slowly. Then, a second time. She adopted him that afternoon. The paperwork, the valid paperwork, the kind that Pruitt was now obligated to complete correctly and completely, took 40 minutes. Nathan waited, sitting in a plastic chair near the front desk, and when Claire came out with Sarge on a lead beside her, the dog walking at her left side with a precision that required no instruction, she stopped in front of Nathan and looked at him with the direct, full attention of a woman who has very little patience left for anything that isn't true. "You drove 6 hours," she said. "James would have done more than that," Nathan said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, with the finality of someone filing something in the place where it belongs, and she walked out the front door and into the January cold with Sarge at her left side. And Sarge went without looking back. Wade Pruitt received a formal compliance review from the County Animal Services Oversight Board in February, initiated by a complaint filed jointly by the Fort Benning Chaplain's Office and the JAG attorney. The review found that the shelter's protocols for handling retired military working dogs were incomplete, and that the notification requirements under federal statute had not been incorporated into their operating procedures. An omission that Pruitt had been responsible for correcting when the relevant regulation had been updated 2 years prior, and had not corrected. He was required to complete remedial training and to revise the shelter's intake protocols under supervision. He retained his position, which was a more merciful outcome than some of the shelter staff believed he deserved, and he did not publicly contest any of it. 5 months later, in June, the yard behind Claire Calloway's house in Fayetteville was green and warm, in the way that North Carolina June is always green and warm. The kind of warm that rises up from the ground as much as it comes down from the sky, that smells of cut grass and red dirt, and the particular sweetness of things that have had enough rain. Her daughters were outside. Sarge was with them, circling the yard in the unhurried patrol that had replaced the tight corners of Kennel 7, his black and tan coat bright in the afternoon light, his scar-crossed muzzle raised into the breeze. The girls had named the game they played with him Ranger School, which their mother had told them about because it was true, and because they deserved to understand who he was and where he had come from and what he had been through. He had the patient, watchful quality of a dog that is exactly where he is supposed to be and has always known the difference between that and every other place. Claire watched from the back porch with a cup of coffee, and Sarge paused in his circuit of the yard and looked at her, and his tail moved, and then he went back to the girls. Nathan Cole drove down from Cartersville on the second Saturday of every month. He ate at the kitchen table and helped with whatever needed fixing and did not talk about James unless Claire wanted to. And sometimes she did, and sometimes she didn't, and either way was fine. He had started sleeping better in the months since January. He was not sure exactly why, only that something that had been unfinished had been finished, and that the finishing of it had done something to the quality of the quiet in his house that he had not expected and did not fully have words for, but that he was grateful for, in the private way that men like Nathan Cole are grateful for things, without announcement and without apology. Sometimes the most important promises are the ones that can't be spoken aloud, because the person who made them is no longer here. Sometimes a dog waiting in a corner for 14 months is not a behavior problem. He is a promise kept, the purest kind, the kind that doesn't require a witness, The kind that continues past the last moment it was convenient, because that is the nature of the loyalty it was built on. God does not always tell us in advance who the keeper of a promise will be. He simply places a dog in a kennel, and a grieving woman in a house in North Carolina, and a man with a 6-hour drive in a truck on a January morning, and he trusts that the connection between them is stronger than any paperwork, any director, any 14 months of silence. Loyalty is not diminished by waiting. It is proved by it. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded today that love does not expire, that it waits and holds and finds its way home. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and tell us this. Have you ever seen loyalty that refused to give up, no matter how long it had to wait? Your story may be exactly what someone in this community needs to read tonight. If you believe in stories of faithfulness, courage, and the bonds that outlast everything, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep you faithful to the promises that matter most, the ones you make, not because they are easy, but because they are true.